Welcome back, chess.com viewers, to my video series on the classical Dutch defense. This is the third video in my short 5 video series, combining this sort of classical Dutch opening video series with attacking chess, because most of the games shown here, an attack starts at some moment. So we're trying to just get to the moments where the attack does start and combine this with the ideas behind the classical Dutch. My opponent in this game was the very experienced grandmaster, very strong grandmaster, who now resides in the Netherlands, Sokolov, Ivan Sokolov, with the white pieces. This game, I believe, was played in 2006, 2016 Reykjavik. And yeah, it was one of the first times I played such a strong player in the Dutch defense. And it was quite interesting. The night before, actually, I was having a drink with some American chess players, and they sort of saw I was playing Sokolov the next day. And these two American chess players, one of them was Ben Johnson, and the other one was Eli Schwartz. And Elon Schwartz basically mentioned that he's just taken up poker, and he's just been playing a bit of poker online, and it sort of was going okay. And he mentioned to me if I won this game, he'd take up the classical Dutch, and hopefully he did take it up after this. But the amusing thing about this was that next time, about 3 years after this tournament, I turned on my TV, and I play and watch a bit of poker myself, and I turned on the final table at the World Series of Poker, which is the biggest poker competition in the world. And there was Elon Schwartz sitting on the table. So he made it to the final table of the Poker World Series. But anyway, I thought that was quite a rare event to happen for any chess player. So we go for the opening moves again. So I played e6 on move one. If you want to reach the Dutch, you can play one f5. But again, you have to be prepared for some of the sidelines here, like the Staunton gambit and other ideas like this. But 1e6 is my normal way of reaching the Dutch defense. But the only problem here is if you're not a French defense player, you have to be prepared for e4. You have to have some idea against this. So e6 was my idea, and now, okay, my opponent did not play it in this way. He's always been a d4 player, so he plays c4. And I continue with my classical Dutch moves. So my setup here is knight f6, bishop e7, castles kingside, d6. And hopefully you become familiar with these moves from the previous 2 videos. And in this series, we're only concentrating on g3 and what happens if white plays the main line, fianchettoing his bishop here. Now, in the last game, I will quickly mention what you should do against other setups, so you're fully covered in these 5 videos. But we're mainly concentrating on g3. So now we go for our idea, knight f6, bishop g2, bishop e7, knight to f3, both sides castle, and now d6. So we've reached the starting moment of the classical Dutch. I've played all their main ideas, and now it's over to white what to play. Now, in most cases here, your next move is going to be knight to e4. That's one thing to remember. So your bishop can come to f6. So that's one of your main ideas here. Another idea is a5 to try to gain space on the queen side and support this b4 square. Another idea, which is quite common, at some point you go queen e8 to h5. Personally, I don't think you should rush this idea because it's much stronger when you've tried to get you've got to try to get the e5 breaking first. I think this is your first priority, one of your main priorities in the middle game. So my opponent now played knight to c3. As in my previous game against Shirov, I threw the knight into the center of the board, knight to e4. And this, again, I think is a very good way to play. The best move in the position. You've got a slightly cramped position, so you want to exchange pieces off the board. And I think one of the strongest lines is if white takes on e4 from a white perspective. Now, previously, we just looked at knight d2. I'll just show you some other ideas of this, so we give you a taster for what you should be thinking of. You're always going to guard your e-pawn with d5. Let's say your opponent goes knight to e1. Well, again, you've got to defend your e-pawn, so d5. And here, let's say he plays something like f3, trying to break up your pawn structure. Well, now, one very strong line here is for black, is if you can try to take advantage of the queen on queen situation here and the placement of white's knight on e1. One thing I kind of try to avoid is positions where you take on f3, they take back with a knight. This is probably perfectly okay for black, and black's probably equal, just a bit dull. And when you play the classical Dutch, you do not want dull positions. So a much stronger line here be pawn takes c4, and if your opponent takes on e4, it may look like he's gained a strong center, but then you have this, even in this position, you have the strong move e5. A very interesting move which tries to take advantage of the pin on the queen on d1, leading to at least an equal position for black. So that gives you another taster of what happens if white takes on e4. But okay, my opponent in this position played a very sensible move, but a rare move, bishop to d2. And this idea is just trying to not double the pawns on the c file and develop a piece. Makes a lot of sense. Here, I played knight to c6 with a particular idea in mind. I mentioned before, your one main thing to do is to play e5. So bishop to f6 would have been a good move here. But by playing knight to c6, I'm kind of preparing e5 again. And I saw in this position, I'm not worried about the advanced d5, which my opponent actually played. So after d5, my idea now was that, not a bit unlike the other positions we've seen where my knight's still on f6, I was now able to take on d2 with my knight. The point being, after my opponent recaptures on d2, I have a very good dark square bishop. He's lost his dark square bishop, and if you can look at where my dark square bishop is ideally placed, it's ideally placed on the f6 square, where it's just cutting across the board. And my bishop on f6 doesn't have any counterpart bishop that it can fight against. So this is a very strong piece, this bishop, this dark square bishop. So this is why I allowed the move d5. And generally your way of now meeting this d5 move, if you ever face it with knight on c6, is to put your knight into the center of the board. So knight to e5. And this is the best square for your knight. So now we'll just move through the middle game stage and see where it gets very tactical now, because I think later on, the opening stage, we're kind of coming to an end now after e3 and now c6. So I'm trying to open up the position. When you have two bishops, it's very important to try to open up the position for your bishops, and c6 is a move that does this, to try to open up the position. b4. This looks a bit unnecessarily weakening this diagonal, so I'm not sure this is a correct move. Okay, bishop f6, getting my bishop to a lovely square. And now we both develop over the next couple of moves. Queen c2, bishop d7. So now that the nature of the game has been changed, because I've got this dark square bishop, I'm simply trying to develop my pieces and get my rook to c8 to open up the c file with c takes d5. Okay, a takes d1, and now a5, again opening up more lines. b5, now I take on d5. My opponent recaptures and rook c8. So around here, of course, black should be doing well. My opponent has to defend passively because of threats. My immediate threat here is, let's say he goes a4, is rook takes c3, queen takes c3, knight to f3 check, winning the queen. So he cannot allow that, obviously. So he has to defend passively. Knight on d to b1 was played. Now I grab the pawn on b5, taking advantage of the pin. The reason I thought this was interesting, this game, was obviously for the opening, but also it's quite similar to the Sheeroff game we just looked at. In this particular position, my opponents felt that his position was getting worse and worse. So again, he goes for a Sheeroff-like idea, and it's all to do with the bishop on g2. My opponent now played d takes e6, sacrificing the exchange to try to increase the power of his bishop on g2. And this is a really good fighting move, and I think it shows you very good practical play. And again, this is, I think, a very good bit of advice for most people watching this video. If you feel your position is going wrong, or if you feel like something is not going right at all in your position, and it's getting worse and worse, sometimes the best way to defend is actively. Active defense is a very good way to defend, and by playing in this manner, white is actively defending. Even though he's losing material, he allows his bishop to enter the game. He gives the d5 square for his knight an option. So this is a very, very good option. Very good fighting move. Okay, I had to take the rook. King takes. Interesting decision, not sure a correct one. Now, my king is a little bit exposed already on this diagonal, so I just tuck it out the way. A prophylactic move. Now, my opponent takes another pawn. Rook to c7, and now queen to b3. The only problem that white has is a lack of coordination with some of his pieces. So, after this move, a4 was a very strange move, just to uncoordinate my opponent's pieces. He can't take with the queen because he loses his bishop. So he takes with his knight, but now his knight can no longer come to d5. And important moment here where I want you as a viewer to combine some of the things we talked about in the last previous videos from Black's idea and also some attacking ideas. Now, it's a very unbalanced dynamic position. You're playing with Black. I've told you some of Black's typical ideas in the Dutch defense. There's one typical maneuver here, even in the middle game, that I employed that worked wonders. It's an idea that we've seen in the opening being played, but it worked absolute wonders in the middle game situation here. See, even ideas that come from openings can be used later on in the games. And I think as long as you get to know these concepts, you'll improve as a chess player. And indeed, as a classical Dutch player, you'll start to understand the positions a lot more. So what is the move I played? Well, the move I played is queen to e8. And this has the typical idea. I'll bring my queen around and attacking my opponent's king. And this works okay because I also have a knight, which is quite aggressively placed to start an attack as well. My opponent now played knight on b to c3, so he's trying to activate his pieces. Queen to h5. My opponent has to defend his king side. It's too passive to start defending with his king because my knight comes to g4. So instead, my opponent gives up his h2 pawn. Here, I played knight to f3, just continuing the attack. My opponent took this knight off. It's a very strong piece. I took with the queen, and now queen to d5 was a mistake. Our queen came back. We're going to get to a critical moment. Queen takes d6, rook to c8, king g2. I give my king an escape square. Knight to b5, and now an interesting move. My piece is now coming to attack. Okay, and again, knight b6. I've gone over the last couple of moves fairly quickly. We've reached yet again another critical moment in the game. Now, there's a lot of it. It's a very double-edged position. So what you have to do here, you have to really think any tempo loss in an attacking position is going to lose you the game. So you need to just think of moves which gain tempo, which attack as aggressively as possible. So my rook on c8 is on being attacked. But if I start moving this rook away, I'm losing so much time. So the way to think in double-edged positions is any move that goes forwards that attacks. Don't try to defend unless you have to. I really think it's better to go forwards to attack in double-edged positions to get your attacking first. Hence why f4 was played. And this simply opens up more lines for my pieces. My queen can now have some chance to attack the knight on b5. My opponent took on f4. Now, one line worth mentioning is if he takes on c8, then I just play f3 check. And after king here, queen to h3. And we can see the move h6 has given my king a very useful escape square. And if something like rook to g1, then rook to c1 will lead to checkmate. A nice variation there, and it would have been a nice final position. So it stops my opponent taking on c8 through active play, f4. And instead of playing this, well, my opponent just played e takes f4. But now the point behind my play is queen to e2 comes, and it gives me more options of checking on e4, so I've removed his e pawn, and my queen has more scope. Let's see if you can find a finish. Rook to f1 has to defend f2, and it's all about speed here. Queen to e4 check. This is the move that f4 allowed me to play. King to g1. Critical moment here again. I'm going to give you, the viewer of this video, just maybe 30 seconds. In this position, black to play. What should black play here? It's, again, critical for how you improve as a chess player. Go along with my thinking from before. If you start defending by moving this rook, you're going very passive. So try to look at attacking moves first. Try to look at the most aggressive moves first. And try to look at everything that throws pieces towards your opponent's king. At the moment, he's only defending with one rook. So how can we expose his king more? Well, I think a very nice finish here was the move rook takes f2. And the point being, well, if king takes f2, he runs into checkmate with rook c2, king here, queen g2. So that would have been mate. Instead, my opponent took with, after rook takes f2, he played rook takes f2, but now with a forcing sequence, he can't survive. I go rook c1 check, only one move, rook f1, and now rook c2 anyway. Threatening queen to g2 check. If he goes rook f2 here, queen to e1 check will lead to mate. You can work that out yourself at home. My opponent instead played queen to d5. But now queen to e2 threatens mate on h2. There's only one way to stop this. Queen to h1. But now it's checkmate in 2 moves. I'm not even going to show you the final move of the game. I'm sure you can work this move out for yourself. Black to play and win with checkmate in 2 moves. Okay, so I think again it shows you some thematic ideas here. Let's just go back for the opening. In this standard position here, this knight to e4 was a very good plan. And after bishop to d2, only now did I play knight to c6, allowing d5 because I was able to swap off his dark square bishop. And in this type of position, I have bishop on e7 that could be a dominating piece. So only in particular circumstances is it a good idea to allow this d5 move to be played. But anyway, obviously I enjoyed that game quite greatly there. And I know Sokolov quite well since that game. Obviously, he was a bit upset losing to someone like me at that stage of my chess career, but one of my better results. And yeah, it was a good game. Celebrated with the Americans after that, so that was quite fun. And yeah, the Dutch are serving me well. So that was the third game in the series. Please have a look at the other videos. There's 2 more videos to watch in this, which should give you a very good understanding of the opening.